morning and welcome to the program Perspectives. Perspectives this morning, we'll be looking at an arm of government, and that arm of government is the judiciary. We all know that there are three arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, and all functions side by side to give a color, a movement to democracy. The rule of law is essential for the functioning of democracy. But what we've seen and what we're seeing in recent times shows that the independence of judges and the judiciary may be under threat. And this is about, what is coming out, from our courts, here court judgments are not being adhered to. And of course, the executive muscling on the judiciary and the legislative too. And so, why is this so, and what can be done, to make the judiciary an independent body of itself? Now, they say that justice delayed is justice denied, but again, would justice be said to be a commodity that can be bought? And of course, we're talking about even those that are involved. We'll be sharing this, with Professor Yusuf Dankofa, a professor of law, Ahmadu Bello University, is Zaria, and he's also a public affairs analyst, commentator on matters of national and international matters. Professor Yusuf Dankofa is my guest this morning. Prof, good morning and glad to have you on the show.
Good morning, Mr. Toyin Alabi, and good morning also to our esteemed listeners.
Yes, I was just giving a background there about the rule of law and how essential it is to the functioning of democracy. And I was just also talking about, independence for judges and judiciary. And what we have seen in recent times does not show these. And could this also be a threat, to judges and the judiciary with the, other arms of government muscling down on the judiciary? We know that the executive, the legislature, all are taking their, putting their pounds or, and weight on the judiciary. And for the judiciary to function well, it must be seen to be independent of itself. And so we also talk about, the law saying that if justice is delayed, it is seen as justice denied. And we have instances to show that court judgments are not sometimes respected. We see when we go back to states and even at national level, what we see cannot be said to be encouraging. For where we are today, independence of the judiciary and threat to its functions, what's your perception here?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, before you can have what you term to be independence of the judiciary, before you can have a functional judiciary that is insulated against external forces, before you can have a judiciary that is not partisan, you must have a regime of the rule of law. And thinkers over time have argued that for society to thrive, there must be rule of law. And this rule of law is somehow contingent on democracy, because democracy as a form of government itself is something that is predicated on constitutionalism, rule of law. So when we talk about rule of law, we are talking about a government that is being run based on the tenets of fairness, inclusivity, and proper procedure. And under a constitutional democracy that advocates rule of law, we have a government that is not arbitrary. We have government that is not dictatorial. We have government of the people, by the people, for the people, and being processed or promoted by law. That is why we often refer to as democracy as constitutional democracy, because the constitution provides for the standards of how to operate. When you have a constitutional democracy, you have a rule of law automatically. It's ingrained, because Government itself is government of limited power, which means it is the law that determines how government should function. If government should act in excess of law, is against rule of law. If government should act, outside the scope of law, is against rule of law, and it can be checked. Which means there is no arbitrariness at the level of executive powers. It's contingent on rule of law, so that you don't have the opposite, which is called rule of man. So rule of law itself is a constraint on government powers. Rule of law also means absence of corruption, because you have proper procedure. Rule of law means open government, accountability. That is, this government can be subjected to scrutiny, evaluation by the people. And also, it creates and protects the rights of the people, human rights. And it also provides an ordered society, a secure society, and also have some form of regulatory enforcement. And in that regard, you establish a civil justice where people would live in peace, because they are already aware that they have an obligation to conform to the rule of law. So essentially, when you have a society that has this kind of background, what you are simply saying is that the country is being run on proper procedure. Everybody's right is protected, no arbitrariness. And to enforce rule of law, you have the courts, because judicial powers lies with the court. It is enshrined in the Constitution, Section 6, judicial powers. And also, because philosophers of old and even contemporary ones have understood that when you constitute too much power on people or on a single individual, there is likelihood of abuse. That's why we say power abuse and absolute power, power corrupts and absolute power corrupt absolutely. So in this regards, democracy also propounded the theory, the principle of separation of powers, so that power will not be entrusted in one single entity, one single institution. So you have separation of powers at the level of three organs of government. You have executive, you have judiciary, and you have the legislature. Now their roles are clearly stated, so there's no conflict. Maybe there's a degree of overlap. So essentially, the function of executive is clear, is embedded in the Constitution, the legislature too, and the court is to act as a check, as a check on the excesses of these two institutions of government, because they are bound to be excesses. One, the court plays this role by, interpreting the law where there is lack of understanding. The courts interpret the law for everybody to understand the law. Two, the court adjudicates and resolve disputes, and that is what makes human society a civilized society, different from animal kingdom. For example, if Mr. A slaps you, civility does not require that you slap him back. You simply access the court for the court to give justice to you. So essentially, we are talking about a society that is standard, a society that is, being run on laws, a better society, a civilizing force, because essentially it downplays authoritarianism. And that is why we keep arguing that any society that does not run its society based on the tenets of law is a society that is not developing. And that is what makes advanced economies different from our own polity, because in those countries, the entire superstructure, the entire spectrum or gamut of human life is predicated on law. Everybody must conform to the law. Everybody has an obligation to conform to the law, and the legal system punishes where there are infractions. So this sends signals to potential deviants that they are not allowed to destroy the society. For peace to reign, there must be law and order, and law and order simply means rule of law must be entrenched. So what we're saying is that it is the court essentially that will assist in establishing the standard of rule of law, because they are the most powerful in terms of application of the law, because they can even check on the executive. We have seen instances where electoral laws are being manipulated and people put in power and the court say no, that process is flawed and it's done. That's rule of law. So it is the court that perform this onerous responsibility, and that is why every institution, every individual must conform to the rule of law, and that's the thing that protects individuals also from arbitrariness of government and other individuals. For example, as an employee, where your employer intends to subvert the law, intends to become dictatorial, people go to court. You have a specialized court in Nigeria, not for that, called industrial court, to resolve industrial dispute, whereby the regime of rule of law will be established, whereby employers will not derogate from the provisions of the law that protects the employee, that is a weaker part of the contract. You see rule of law in relationship between landlord and tenants. You see rule of law in contract. You see rule of law in all aspects, even between the relationship between government and the governed. You see rule of law. People go to court, and seek for enforcement of their fundamental rights. So the court plays very, very critical role. And the question is, where the court is unable to play this role because of the problems that we have enumerated. One, lack of independence. Two, the problem of long trial, the problem of justice delayed, justice being delayed. So the question is, if you have a system where courts can no longer function and give, timelessly, judgments, that will benefit society, where judges are not insulated, from authorities that put them in place, where a system, is being run that judges too, are not protected from the patronage system, where judges are appointed not based on merit. So when you have all these kind of problems, you realize that the judiciary might not function very well. And added to this, is the class structure of underdeveloped nations like Nigeria, where, government itself, in most cases, do not obey court decisions, where the powerful and the privileged class do not obey court decision. So you realize that if such thing happens, what you are promoting is anarchy. That is the rule of man that we are all running away from, where man is more powerful than the law. Just for example, what was trending online some few days ago, that the son to the wife of the governor of Kano State petitioned his mother, to EFCC, and she refused to honor the invitation, whereby she has no immunity. So you see, these are negative signals that does not augur well for peace and development of any society.
Yes, along one there about the rule of law and how it entrenches the function of democracy. But let's get to this point. At one time in the life of this country, the judges or people of the bar or the law, were respected. They were seen as learned people and all of that. But would this situation that we're finding ourselves have been a situation that the military, because again, people will say the tragedy of Nigeria could have started with the military. Could this be, a military hangover that we have today? And then, of course, with our democratic process, they've helped to abuse, the rule of law and not making the judiciary function as it is.
Yes, that could be correct. That's a plausible argument, because under military, you have a kind of, unification, system of politics, of leadership, where everything is centered, within the federal government, and therefore, the financial independence of judiciary became difficult, because military regime means, does not, talk about democracy. It's not about democracy. Military regime is about, a system where you have a kind of unification, so federalism doesn't really thrive under military regime. So admittedly, that also could be part of the problem. And also the military itself entrenched a culture of patronage in terms of employment, where people get employed into public offices and even judiciary based on patronage, based on who you know, not on merit. So when you take away merit in terms of appointment in the judiciary, it's a big problem, because it is a platform where people need to be independent-minded, people need to be courageous. So when you have judges that are being appointed based on, patronage from, being connected, how can they dispense justice against them? How can they award, judgment against them? How can they be courageous against them? So the first argument is to develop a democratic process of, appointment of judges, which I believe with the establishment of the NJC, there's an attempt to, make it a much more open and democratized process. But still, people still argue. And I'm aware that about 2 years ago, some civil society groups went to court that the list of appointed judges, about 2 years ago at the federal judiciary were such that most of them were from privileged background only, and which means, a class distinction has been introduced into the appointment of judges, which means it's only the children of the privileged that are being considered for appointment. And this will not augur well for the independence of judiciary, where all the names you hear are the names of retired judges, retired justices of the Court of Appeal, and also heavyweights in the society, big political names. So some people went to court that, look, beside the fact that this list, exhibits a class issue, some of them are not even qualified. Some of them are not even satisfied of 10 years, before they can be, appointed. So despite the fact that there's still some effort sanitizing the system through the work of NGC, yes, there are still so many gaps, and that is the problem. The position of a judge is so critical to human development and justice delivery, that where you have incompetent judges, where you have corrupt judges, you are simply destroying that society, because judges have the power of life and death. They can withdraw your freedom, they can incarcerate you, for the purpose of eliminating, antisocial conduct in society. They are a filtration process where the bad eggs are taken out of the society. So where these people that are supposed to dispense this justice, to be dispassionate in terms of adjudication, compromise, then there's a problem. So what makes them compromise? One, like we said, first and foremost, there must be total independence of judiciary, financial independence, and also in terms of appointment. Two, judges must also be monitored. The NJC here acts as a monitoring agent, but some of them could be so powerful that when they act arbitrarily, nothing can be done. So, and also in this area, I think the Nigerian Bar Association (NBA) should step up its action, and establish a monitoring committee on the behavior and activities of these judges at all levels. So, essentially, that is the problem. Beyond this,
I have to get all I want, from you this morning. What happened? You recall that when Buhari, people will say, pounced on the judiciary, in some people will say in a special way, or in a way that was not expected, and we found judges with so much millions and of dollars and naira, and that could not be explained. And so we begin to wonder if this could happen in an arm of government that should serve as check and balances to the executive and the legislature. And of course, looking at the common man's position in all of this, judges with so much mind-boggling amounts of money in accounts that one begins to wonder, how did they come about it?
Yes, the problem with Nigeria is that we scratch the surface. We don't go deep down and try to see the root of the problems and solve it. Now, I'm not supporting that kind of action or that kind of, activity. But what we are saying is that in a situation where judges are not well incentivized, in a situation where judges are not well paid, so you open up opportunities for them to become corrupt.
So who suffers? Who suffers in all of this? Who suffers?
Yes, we know that the state suffers, but the problem is that you can't just Nigeria has the lowest rate of emolument for judges, and we could see that in what the president of the Court of Appeal said about a week ago, that she collects less than 300,000 naira. That is our pay. Even with all the further emoluments, it's not up to 700,000 naira. So how can you, for heaven's sake, you have a judge of a Court of Appeal or judge of a Supreme Court and give him 700,000 naira, where you reward a councillor, which much more than that, or you reward a member of House of Assembly, or you give opportunities to a senator in which some of them go with about 30 million naira per month. So the wage structure in Nigeria is so tilted against fairness, justice. And before you can have a society that is balanced, you must have equity in terms of remuneration. You must be able to establish an incentive structure that will encourage or motivate people to work and dedicate themselves to the service of their nation. When people are poorly paid, how can they work? Even the CGM, I think about 2 years ago, said it in public that he has been lobbying the government to give the judiciary its own due. And that's why there was strike action about a year ago, a continuous strike action by JUSU, that look, give us our own money so that we can develop judiciary. You can't just take our money, and just give it to state governors, and the head of judiciary will have to be applying to the state governor for pension, for biro, for paper. It's not done anywhere. Why is the money meant for judiciary from federation account being channeled to states? That's part of the problem. Give us our money. Let's develop ourselves. Let's train ourselves. Let's provide infrastructure for ourselves. Let's be able to see that we give incentive to our people so that they can function. Because the work of this, some of them are overworked. You go to a court, for example, Lagos Judiciary. You go to a court and you see about 30 cases on a cost list. You come to Abuja, you go to you see about 20 cases on a cost list. A judge will have to sit from morning till evening and listen to so many applications, and there is no fund for technology to support their work. So why wouldn't there be justice delayed? Why wouldn't justice be delayed? Rather, so everything goes to funding, proper funding. Where you refuse to fund the judiciary and also do not award or give respectable emolument to the judges, there's a question mark. And see how governors humiliate judges. They will just tell the world, okay, we have bought cars for judges, as if it is not their entitlement, and they politicize it and make it a huge media affair. It's humiliation. It's humiliation. You're humiliating the judges. If you buy them cars, must you announce it?
Yeah. Okay, Prof. You just allow us. We must go for a commercial break. I'll be back with you shortly there.
We'll be right back after this quick commercial break.
Are you serious? Victor FM.
Every day, baby.
This is the station playing today's best mix.
Terrific. FM.
Perceptions could change. Opinions can be formed with more and accurate information. Get all sides, views, and opinions on topical issues. Have your say on Perspectives. With Twin Alabi at 9 a.m. Mondays to Fridays on Invicta 98.9 FM. Perspectives. All sides, all views, all individuals are welcome.
Welcome back. It's the program Perspectives this morning, and we're looking at the independence of judges and the judiciary. Could this just be said to be under threat? Now, this morning we're having this discussion with Professor Yusuf Nkufa, a professor of law at Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, a public affairs analyst and a commentator on national and international matters. Prof, we left something, or I left something out, and I want to talk about the point of entry. The point of entry, if that could be a problem to what we're seeing today. I'm talking about applying to read law. Of course, at one time we know that after the law school, after the degree at the university, you still have to go to a law school. The law school at one time was situated in Lagos. That every graduate of law from any of the universities would have to go to the Nigerian law school in Lagos again. And at another point in time, we had arguments of all sorts that came about it, and so we had separations or zoning of our law schools, and so people just would have their BL as it is, or LLB from their states and all of that. Could that also be a problem? Because I want to go into what happens at the customary court too, and move to the magistrates, where we see blatant this abuse of the law that we see there. Before we begin to go to the high courts, the Court of Appeal, and of course the Supreme Court. And we having problems, at the point of entry into, to practice this learned profession, as would be said.
That's not the problem. And there are policies that have been put in place to regulate legal education in Nigeria. You have the Council of Legal Education. You even have the universities. There are accreditation programs. And universities must conform to those standards, and that of law school too is there. And don't forget, judges are not employed immediately after they complete their law studies. No. As a matter of fact, for the Court of Records, that's from the High Court, minimum qualification, apart from the degrees and all whatnot, is 10 years in the bar. So it's expected that having spent 10 years in the bar, you will have acquired the necessary skill, understanding, and experience, and even composure to become a High Court judge. And don't also forget, we have the National Judicial Institute that continue to train and retrain judges. So I don't think the entry point is the problem. But of course, I'm also aware that in some states, magistrate courts, and also customary courts, you have judges that have not spent up to 2-3 years, in the bar. That's a problem, because one, they've not had the real experience. Two, they are still very brash in terms of their outlook. And most of the times, like you said, they dispense justice, in such a way that, it antagonizes, the legal system in its entirety. But then, there are institutions put in place to checkmate some of these people. It's just that those institutions hardly work. And that is why at times you have petitions against, some of these people directly to the NGC. I'm aware that a customary court judge in Abuja has been suspended by the CJN because of some of these, infractions, or some of these blatant, miscarriage of justice, or just blatant rape on proper procedure. So, for the lower courts, I believe that beyond what the judiciary has put in place to checkmate them, the bar, the NBA, for every state should also, be a kind of, ombudsman, act as a kind of supervisory, entity on some of these judges. And the bar can take very, very, serious position. The bar can act as an agent of purification of what is happening at the lower courts. From the court, from the Court of Records, that is Court of First Instance, the High Court, Federal High Court, up, I think there's a semblance of sanity. But the problem is they are not well remunerated, and they are being overburdened, and there is no technology to assist in mitigating, the high volumes that workload demands.
Can we make a difference here about what happens at a state judiciary and what happens at national level? I'm bringing this because of a situation in one of the states of the country where, of course, the governor, the executive wanted a choice of his own, but by hierarchy, by promotion, by position, there was someone that was, merited that position as the Attorney General of the state, but the governor just would not have it that way. And so, at state level, what are we seeing with what happens at national level?
But still, you have to give credit to the NJC, because the NJC acted as a true check on the arbitrariness of the governor. They refused to accept. So that's why we say the NJC, if properly funded and supported, can act, as a weeding process to weed out some of these bad eggs. Also, there's a need. You see, the NBS must play a larger than life role, because it's the role of the bar to act as check on some of these political actors, because politicians, especially the present crop of politicians, have the tendency, to destroy the entire legal system based on their own selfish interest. So governors at times shop for a candidate that will do their bidding for the position of CJ. And this should stop, because the judiciary itself have its own convention on how a CJ will emerge. There's a convention in terms of promotion, which has established cohesion, over time, because it's a consistent convention based on seniority. But where judges want to subvert this convention, of course, it is not by law, but it's a convention that has promoted peace over time. That, okay, if I queue up, it's going to be my turn someday. That's justice. But I queue up and it wasn't going to be my turn because of political affiliation. That is disruptive. So yes, politicians have a way of manipulating the system towards, promoting their own selfish interests, which in turn can destroy the morale of the judges. But most of the times, the NJC have acted tirelessly to prevent such occurrences and to refuse to accept, the candidate of the governor. So,
We've
problems.
also seen, still talking about what happens at state levels, we've also seen where, the three arms of government, executive, the legislature and the judiciary, where the legislature and maybe the judiciary had been taken out, just appendages of what happens, from the executive. It is the executive that passes that down or hands over whatever, how they want, the state to be run. And so, what role can they play? And what's for the common man in all of this arrangement?
Yes, you are right that at times state governors tend to muzzle the judiciary and tends to, manipulate them so as for the judiciary to do their biddings. But we still have to give it to some of them that are still courageous. For example, in Kaduna State, there have been so many decisions against the state government. So some of the judges are courageous. Admittedly, there are some that pander to the whims and caprices, and that is why we are saying that the recruitment process should be critically re-evaluated, because where people that are timid or people are being given judicial appointment based on who they know, patronage, then they would never be able to exhibit the rare and uncommon courage that the judiciary needs, because it's a position that needs courage, because you have to be able to tell the government that no, you are wrong, and you award judgment against them. So if you don't have courageous people on the bench, how would they be able to do that? Where you have a pliant judiciary. So we could see during the military regime.
Well, Prof, and another thing coming out of this is that in our prisons today, we're talking about overcrowding, and for some of the inmates there, some of them would say that they're just there because there was no support from anywhere, and they just cannot say the reason why they're in prison, or some of them are awaiting trial. This again, some people would say, will be about the overzealousness sometimes of these judges, or what could have gone underground that people just do not know about.
No, I think that's why I say the NBA should really sit down and look deeper at what it's doing. we've always argued a lawyer should take up pro bono cases. That is, those indigent litigants who do not have capacity to get a lawyer. Because as it is now, the moment you have a matter before a court, if you don't have a lawyer, you are disadvantaged. Because the judge might be blackmailed, especially where it is a criminal matter. The judge might be blackmailed. We've seen instances where the police will blackmail the judges. Police prosecutor will not do their job, but they will blackmail judges that they are setting accused free. So yes, there is presumption of innocence, but where litigants that are poor cannot afford lawyers, it is expedient for the bar, for members of the bar, to continue to provide pro bono cases. And also there's legal aid council that is not funded, that is being underfunded too. So there are institutions, and you have the Human Rights Commission. There are institutions meant to address some of these problems. And judges too, chief judges of states too, are empowered to engage in prison visits and look at some of these problems. So to me, I don't really agree that most of the problems that litigants have, especially those that end up in prison and have problems in perfecting their bail, is largely from the judiciary. No, I think it is a fallout, or it is a drawback on the role of legal practitioners. We have in Kaduna, for example, we have about 4 NBA branches. You have one in Kaduna, one in Zaria, one in Kafanchan. So the chairman of this bar association, should determine, how they will function in terms of, extending their services to the less privileged of the society. So it is because the NBA is not doing well in terms of protecting the vulnerables in our society. That's why you have this problem. If the bar were to be proactive and also think beyond their own personal clients, if lawyers should start thinking beyond their own personal clients and look into the dejected, the rejected, and the exploited, I think we'll solve a lot of people's problems.
Okay, bro.
So I'm not going to blame the judiciary for that.
Just allow me to bring in 1 or 2 calls here, and at the end of it, just want to make a request for you before you go off the program. So 1 or 2 calls before we bring it to a close. Numbers to call to be part of this conversation: 081 40,000 989, 081 40,000 989, or 070 87 800 989, 070 87 800 989. Hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Pius is calling you from Malali, Kaduna.
Let's hear you.
Good morning to the prof.
Good morning.
Thank you. Sir, in order to address these all inadequacies that we are facing in our own judicial system, as a prof, what would you like to suggest for the government of Nigeria to bring on board in order to reform and transform our own judicial system for good and for the betterment of all Nigeria?
Okay, Pius, we got you on that. Let's squeeze in another call here. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, good morning.
And good morning to your guest.
Yes.
Your answer, Engineer Manuel. Yes. I appreciate your guest this morning. I want to ask him just 2 questions. The sack or the remove of the former Chief Justice of the Federation, was it according to the law? That's number 1. Then number 2, those that are being appointed into our judges, is it by qualification or just to please some regions? Because just some weeks ago, we see those that were migrate into the judges, and we saw where they come from. But we control like this, because it's like, now look at all the contradicting judgments, left, right, and center. This one will give another judgment, this one will counter it. Does this supposed to work like this in this first century of our democracy?
Okay, Engineer Manuel. All right. Prof, let me just come to you quickly. Pius, was asking that, reforms in the judiciary, what reforms would you want to what's on ground now. And Engineer Emmanuel, okay, removal of dismissal, not removal, of Walter Onogie is something that still has a sour taste. Yeah, so about that, and then appointment of judges. Would it be on merit, as of sin, or that some people are saying that it again tilted to what the situation of the country had been about some people not being in the system, and contradictory judgments in our courts. Your take on all of this?
Yes, in terms of reforms, the reforms we are seeking for should be, one, the financial autonomy of the judiciary. It should be one of the high points of any reform. They should not go cap in hand begging government for their entitlement. That's the most fundamental form of reforms. Two, their emoluments should be looked into so as to provide them some kind of motivation to allow them, dispassionately do the work. Because with poor remuneration, you are not going to get the best out of any human being. Now, the funding coming direct to them will make sure that they provide better infrastructures for themselves, working tools for themselves, training for themselves. So those are essentially the reforms. And also in terms of employment, people have argued that there should be more focus, or focus should be given more to academics rather than this practice of, appointing close to 80% of judges from the bureaucracy. So these are kind of reforms that try to create a mix. Yes, some percentage from the public service, from the public bar, some percentage from the private bar, some percentage from academia. In fact, more percentage from academia, because people from academia come from a background of independence of thoughts. People from academia come from a background of, being able to be assertive. Unlike the person that comes from the public bar, you can imagine a public prosecutor that is being appointed as a judge. All his life he has been prosecuting for government. So given that position of a judge, is likely going to tilt towards government position. So, but when you, make sure that percentage of these people are coming from the private bar, that independence has always been there. So these are some of the reforms that is very key towards enhancing the performance and justice delivery that we expect from the judiciary. As per the Onogie case, I think this matter is still in court, but I believe that at the end of the day, the court will be able to make justice. I don't want to really preempt, because there are two sides to the case. Onogie has clearly said he was being, targeted because of a perceived, belief that he was going to work in favor of a presidential candidate, So that is why he was treated that way. But of course, we all know that due process was not followed. And that has been the argument. That yes, you can charge anybody to court, especially if that person has no immunity, but let there be due process. The speed at which the Onogie saga was concluded, is something that, gives a great sign of discomfort. That how come this particular case, was so determined, timelessly, as compared to other matters in court. So it continued to reinforce the thinking of the people that government had more than a passing interest in that situation.
Yes, again, Engineer Emmanuel talked about contradictory judgments that we get in our courts too.
Yes, I think the office of the CJN have taken, necessary action. The CJs of those states have been queried. The judges involved are facing panels. They are asked to, be able to give reasons why disciplinary action should not be taken against them. because it is manifestly out of context what they did. Because we know that courts of coordinate jurisdiction, should not behave the way they were behaving. That's why we have hierarchy of courts. If there's an order from a high court, for example, you don't have to go seeking for the orders of a court of coordinate jurisdiction. You go and appeal. That's why you have the appellate structure. But whereas that appellate structure is being subverted for this kind of behavior, it shows that there are more to it that meets the ordinary eye, and that is the nature of politicians. So that's why we say the judiciary itself must make sure it insulates itself from the vagaries of politicians, because politicians will corrupt them. Politicians will make them, pander to their whims as against, justice. So it is irregular for a court to give a ruling and another court of same standing to give a counter ruling. It's irregular. It's not done anywhere. And we're happy that the office of the CJM has taken steps, to correct these things. And day in, day out, CJs of Nigeria keep telling judges, that they should be very wary of politicians and very careful of giving conflicting or giving an order that does not accord to proper procedure. Especially where the other court has been informed that there is a subsisting court order from its sister court. So I don't see why such court should take up this matter. So when there is, the will to discipline erring judges, I think is going to impact positively on others and going to promote a sense of,
Well, Prof, my request, live here that I'm making to you is that if I could, get another time, your time within the week, because so much to talk about the judiciary on the thread, or how it can perform better than it is doing now. So, would want to request that you give us a day within the week too, that we can, so many questions to ask, because I have not gone on to the common man, how it affects the poor and the common one in our society. So, if I could get, your commitment here.
Yes, I'll be with you on Thursday, God willing. Thursday morning, God willing. I'll be in the studios.
Thank you very much, Professor Yusuf. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Yes. And that will just be about the size of it on the program perspective this morning. We're looking at the judiciary and on the threat and all of that. And Professor Yusuf Onkofa, Professor of Law, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, commentator, national and international matters, and public affairs analyst, sharing thoughts with us this morning. Dr. Spagaya, thank you for connecting us with the people and wisdom. Thank you for putting us in the pictures. Good morning.